the lawyer slid the papers across the table and said, "Just sign here and this all goes away quietly." My hand froze over the pen as I realized everyone in the room, including my own mother, was holding their breath, waiting for me to give away everything my father died protecting. That's when I started counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a lot of people you brought. I smiled for the first time that day. Funny thing is, I only brought one person too. What happened next turned my mother's scheme into the biggest mistake of her life. But before I tell you how this family meeting became a courtroom disaster, let me ask you this. What would you do if your own parent tried to steal your inheritance right in front of you? Stick around until the end because the way this unfolded will shock you. Hey everyone, I'm Jessica Martinez, I'm 28 and I work remotely in tech from San Diego. If this story helps even one person protect themselves from family financial abuse, then sharing it is worth it. Before we dive in, please hit that like button. It really helps get this message out to people who need to hear it. And subscribe so you don't miss the follow-up where I'll share the exact legal steps I took to protect my accounts. Drop a comment below telling me if you've ever dealt with family drama over money, because trust me, you're not alone. Now let me take you back to how this nightmare started. I wasn't always the woman sitting across from a lawyer, counting people like chess pieces on a board. For most of my life, I was just a kid from a quiet San Diego suburb who thought family meant game nights, Target runs, and my dad Marcus's terrible jokes about Python code. My dad was a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company, the kind of guy who meal prepped on Sundays and drove the same Toyota Camry for 10 years because it still runs fine. My mom Diane hated that philosophy. She wanted the house with the water view, the new Lexus in the driveway, the Instagram-worthy vacations that made her friends jealous. When I was 15, the gap between their values finally tore them apart. I still remember the night they sat me down at our kitchen table. Dad had a folder of printed bank statements. Mom had a Pinterest board of vacation homes glowing on her tablet. She told me she was tired of just surviving. He told her he was tired of pretending they could afford a life they hadn't built yet. California is a community property state, which meant the court looked at everything they'd accumulated during the marriage and split it down the middle. My mom saw it as her chance to finally upgrade. My dad saw it as losing half of everything he'd worked for while still being responsible for alimony and child support. After the divorce, I lived mostly with Dad in a modest condo near Encinitas. Nothing fancy, but on quiet nights I could hear the ocean if I cracked my bedroom window. Friday nights meant picking dinner from DoorDash and eating tacos straight from the containers while binging Netflix. He taught me how to use budgeting apps, explained what a Roth IRA was, why credit scores mattered more than designer handbags. While other kids' parents bragged about new cars, my dad bragged about paying off his credit card in full every month. My mom, meanwhile, moved north to Carlsbad and reinvented herself overnight. She married Trevor, a smooth-talking real estate agent who specialized in selling homes that looked like HGTV showrooms. Suddenly her Facebook exploded with photos of backyard wine nights and family beach days. She had 2 stepkids now, Sophia and Brandon, and they all wore matching outfits in their holiday cards. Technically I was still her daughter. But most days I felt like a guest star in the perfect family she was busy curating online. Every time I scrolled past her posts, it was the same vibe. So grateful for my amazing family. Living my best life. Blessed beyond measure. I was never in those pictures. She didn't call to ask how my college applications were going or what I wanted to major in. She called to tell me Sophia made honor roll or Brandon won some club tournament. The only time my name came up was when she complained to my dad about money, how child support wasn't enough, how I needed new things, how he should step up. My dad would come home from those conversations a little quieter, a little more worn out. But he always bounced back by putting on some old comedy special and making popcorn the old-fashioned way on the stove. On weekends, we'd hike the trails near Torrey Pines or drive up the coast for cheap day trips. He'd point at the cliffside mansions and say, "People obsess over houses like that, but they still go to bed with the same problems as everyone else." He kept our life simple, but it felt honest. At night, when I'd lie awake worrying that somehow I was the reason everything fell apart, he'd sit on the edge of my bed and tell me, "Jess, you don't owe anyone your future just because they share your last name. Build something real, something that belongs to you." Those words sounded so dramatic back then, like something a TV dad would say. I didn't know he was quietly meeting with an attorney, updating legal paperwork, making sure that if anything ever happened to him, I wouldn't be at the mercy of my mother's version of fair. I thought the worst part of my life was behind me once the divorce dust settled and everyone moved on. I had no idea that one rainy night on the I-5 years later would take my father away and turn those quiet money lessons into an all-out war over everything he left behind. When you grow up with a dad who double-checks every seatbelt and reroutes around traffic just to be safe, you never think car accident is how his story ends. One rainy Tuesday evening, Dad was driving back down the I-5 after staying late at the office to finish a product release. A drowsy driver drifted across lanes. There was a chain reaction, and by the time the highway patrol called me, my father was already gone. The world went silent in that way it does when someone rips the foundation out from under your entire life. The funeral was small and simple, just like he would have wanted. A handful of co-workers from his tech company, a couple of neighbors from the condo building, and me standing there trying to breathe around the knot in my chest. My mom showed up dressed in black like a movie widow, Trevor by her side, Sophia and Brandon standing behind them like props. She cried loud enough for everyone to hear, hugging people she hadn't spoken to in years, telling anyone who would listen how heartbroken she was. I stood next to his urn thinking, you didn't love this man. You loved the life he couldn't give you. After the service, while people were still drifting toward the parking lot, a woman in a navy blazer and practical heels approached me. She introduced herself as Nina, my father's attorney. We sat at a weathered picnic table outside the chapel, the air thick with the smell of flowers and cheap coffee. She explained that Dad had been very thorough, that he'd updated his will multiple times after the divorce, that he'd been concerned about potential pressure from my mother. But that's exactly what happened. That was her polite way of saying, he knew your mom would come for his money the second he was gone. According to the will, everything that was unquestionably his separate property, plus all the assets he'd built since the divorce, came to me. The condo in Encinitas, his tech stock portfolio, Apple index funds, his IRA and 401k rollovers. It wasn't billionaire money, but it was the careful, solid wealth of a man who'd spent his whole life being responsible. I should have felt guilty hearing it all went to me. Instead, I just felt sad and weirdly proud, like he'd managed to protect me even from beyond the grave. Nina told me about California's probate process, how the court would validate the will, oversee asset transfers, make sure no one could challenge it without legitimate grounds. She looked me in the eye and said, your father was very clear, Jessica. He wanted you to have control of your future without interference. The word interference hung in the air like a storm cloud. Right on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. A long paragraph about how we need to talk, how your father would want you to think about the whole family, how we should handle his estate like adults. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She asked when we could discuss numbers. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I answered politely, said we could talk after probate was underway, mentioned Dad had an attorney. She ignored that part and went straight to asking for rough estimates of what he'd left, like she was pricing inventory. When I didn't respond fast enough, the guilt-tripping started. She reminded me of all the times she'd taken care of me as a kid, how expensive my teenage years were, how Sophia and Brandon needed help with college tuition. It was always the same phrase on repeat. You have to think about the family. What she meant was her new family. I forwarded the messages to Nina. She told me not to share specific balances or documents, not to sign anything, not to agree to any private deals. She said that if my mom wanted to challenge the will, she could hire her own lawyer and file in court. But based on the paperwork Dad had prepared, it would be a long shot. I decided to trust the woman my father had trusted, even if it meant disappointing the woman who gave birth to me. That's when Mom's tone shifted from emotional manipulation to veiled threats. She started leaving voicemails about how lawyers were expensive, how this could drag on for years, how my credit could be affected if there was a messy legal fight. She'd sprinkle in something sentimental, I'm just trying to look out for you, before sliding into, you don't want this to get ugly, do you? It was like listening to a sales pitch wrapped in a sympathy card. The more I held my ground, the more desperate she sounded. I stopped answering her calls and started documenting everything. Dates, times, what she said. My dad had taught me that money fights make people reckless, and reckless people leave evidence. A few weeks after the funeral, probate officially confirmed the will. The condo, the accounts, everything transferred into my name. Nina sent me a tidy folder with legal copies and a calm email about next steps. Within 24 hours my mom emailed me too. The subject line, family meeting. The body was full of phrases like, clear the air, discuss options, and find a fair solution. She said it would just be us. A small group, nothing formal. She suggested a nice restaurant in Irvine and said she'd reserve a private room so we could talk openly. I stared at that email for a long time, feeling the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. My dad had done everything right. Followed every rule. And somehow I still felt like prey being invited to walk calmly into a trap. I forwarded the email to Nina with one simple question. Will you come with me? Nina didn't even hesitate. She called me instead of replying by email, her voice steady in a way that made my shoulders finally drop a little. She said she'd be there, that I wasn't going to walk into any meeting alone, and that if my mother wanted to play games with legal documents, she'd picked the wrong opponent. The day of the family meeting, I drove up to Irvine with a knot in my stomach and a folder in my bag. Inside were copies of the will, the probate confirmation, and a notepad where I'd written dates and summaries of every voicemail and guilt-soaked text my mother had sent since the funeral. It was my little shield of paper against years of being told I was ungrateful whenever I didn't roll over. Nina and I agreed on a simple plan. I'd go in first, see who was there, see what they put on the table. She'd wait nearby and come in when I texted her. That way Mom wouldn't have the chance to spin it as an ambush, even though that's exactly what she had planned for me. The restaurant was the kind of place with awkwardly quiet music and water glasses that never seemed to empty. A hostess led me past couples on dates and business lunches to the back, where a frosted glass door marked private was already closed. My heart thudded against my ribs as she opened it. And I stepped into the room I described at the very beginning of this story. My mom sat at the head of the table in a black blouse, posture perfect, like she was chairing a board meeting. Trevor sat to her right in a blazer that looked expensive but slightly too tight, like he'd grown into a different version of himself than the one who'd bought it. Sophia and Brandon were there too, on the opposite side of the table, next to a man in a gray suit with a sleek laptop open in front of him. No one had menus. There was a pitcher of water, a neat stack of papers, and a pen aligned perfectly on top. Jessica, you made it, my mom said as if I'd shown up early to help decorate for a party. We just want to talk. The man in the suit stood up and offered his hand. He introduced himself as Daniel, an attorney, helping the family explore options regarding your father's estate. The way he said family made it sound like everyone in the room had lost the same thing I had, like we were all equals here just trying to divvy up grief. I sat down slowly and noticed the top page of the stack in front of me. It had my name on it, and more legal language than any normal person would voluntarily read over brunch. Terms like redistribution, voluntary agreement, and irrevocable. My stomach flipped. Before you panic, my mom said, leaning forward with a practiced sympathetic look. We just want to make sure everyone is provided for. Your father's will didn't consider the reality of the family now. Things are different. She gestured to Sophia and Brandon as if they were line items in a budget. College is expensive. Life is expensive. This is just about fairness. Daniel took over, explaining that the document was a family settlement agreement that would allow me to transfer a reasonable portion of the inheritance into a shared trust. Reasonable, according to the numbers printed in stark black ink, meant about 65%. He said it in the same tone someone might use to suggest splitting a check. I kept my face neutral, but inside I could feel heat rising. My dad had worked overtime, driven that damn I-5 at night, skipped vacations for years. And now I was being told that honoring his choices was selfish. No one is trying to take anything from you, my mom added, which was almost funny considering the contract literally existed to take things from me. We just don't want this to become a long, ugly legal fight. That would hurt your credit, your future. This way we handle it privately like adults. I thought about the text she'd sent. The voicemails where her voice sharpened whenever she said the word fair. I thought about my dad sitting on the edge of my bed telling me I didn't owe anyone my future. I took a breath. So, I said carefully, if I don't sign this, what happens? The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Trevor shifted in his seat. Sophia stared at the table. Brandon kept looking at his phone like he wished he was anywhere else. Daniel folded his hands and gave me a look that might have been meant to pass for kind. Then this could become complicated, he said. Your mother could contest certain aspects of the probate. There could be long delays, legal fees, public records. It might impact your credit or your ability to move quickly with the assets. Conflict is stressful. We're trying to avoid that. My mom jumped back in, her voice tightening just enough to slip the mask. We're giving you a chance to show you care about this family, Jessica. You're not the only one who lost something. Sophia is applying to colleges. Brandon has his whole future ahead of him. We're asking you to do the right thing. I looked at each of them. The lawyer ready to bill by the hour. Trevor, who'd married into my mother's hunger for status. 2 teenagers who'd grown up in a world where I was a footnote. And my mother, who could cry on command and talk about love while pushing a pen toward my hand. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but my voice came out calm. How many of you are there again? I asked softly, mostly to myself at first. My mom frowned. What does that have to do with anything? I let my gaze slide around the table like I was counting place settings. 1, I said, nodding toward my mom. 2 to Trevor. 3. For Sophia and Brandon. I paused on Daniel. 5. The room went quiet except for the low hum of the restaurant outside the door. You're a lot of people, I said finally, meeting my mom's eyes. Confusion flickered across her face, then irritation. Jessica, this isn't a joke. I smiled. And for the first time since I walked in, I felt something other than fear. I felt ready. You're right, I said. It's not. I reached down, pulled my phone from my bag and tapped out a single word I'd already typed into a draft before I arrived. Then I set the phone face down next to the untouched pen. Funny thing is, I added, I only brought one person too. A soft knock sounded on the door a few seconds later. Sharp and precise. The hostess opened it just enough to let a woman in a navy blazer step through, a familiar folder in her hand and a calm, professional smile on her face. Hi Diane, Nina said politely. I hear you wanted to talk about Jessica's inheritance. If you're still watching, drop a comment right now and tell me, would you have signed those papers or walked out? I want to know what you would have done in that moment. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because what happened after Nina walked in is where this story gets really intense. I'm talking courtroom drama, digital evidence, and consequences my mother never saw coming. Stay tuned because the next part involves security cameras, fake emails, and the moment I realized my own mother was trying to hack into my bank account. After that meeting, my mom stopped pretending to be hurt and started acting like someone who'd just lost a bid on a very expensive house. She walked out of the restaurant stiff and silent, Trevor at her elbow, her lawyer mumbling something about revisiting options. Nina and I stayed behind for a few minutes, just long enough for my hands to stop shaking. She told me I'd handled it exactly right, that I had every legal right to say no, and that if my mother tried anything else, we'd deal with it together. I wanted to believe that was the end of it. For about 3 days my phone was quiet. No guilt-tripping texts. No long voicemails. I almost let myself think that maybe the shock of having a real attorney walk in had scared my mom straight. Then the messages started again, but colder this time. She sent a long text about how disappointed she was, how ashamed my father would be, how money has changed you. She hinted that if I kept being stubborn I might regret how complicated things could get with accounts and paperwork. It didn't sound like a threat of more brunch meetings. It sounded like a warning from someone who'd finally accepted she couldn't get what she wanted by asking nicely. I forwarded everything to Nina. She told me to keep every message and not respond. Then she added something that made my stomach twist. If she can't move you emotionally, she might try to move you financially. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter with my laptop open and went through every account I had. I changed passwords, turned on 2-factor authentication for my bank and investment apps, checked security questions, and froze my credit with all 3 major bureaus. It was the grown-up version of barricading the door, one app notification at a time. My dad used to say, in this country, your data is worth more than the cash in your wallet. I'd never really felt the weight of that until I was clicking through settings with my heart pounding, imagining my mother whispering my childhood address and first pet's name into some login screen. A few days later I got an email that looked exactly like the kind my bank usually sent. Same logo, same colors, same subject line template. Important action required. The only reason I hesitated before clicking was because the timing felt wrong. I just updated my security, and the universe is rarely that on the nose. I hovered over the link instead of tapping it. The URL was close but not quite right. The kind of fake domain you only notice if you're already suspicious. My skin went cold. Someone hadn't just guessed my bank. They'd been paying attention. I called the bank directly using the number on the back of my card. They confirmed they hadn't sent any security emails that week, and that there had been at least one failed login attempt from an unfamiliar device on one of my investment accounts. The representative helped me lock everything down even further, then told me to file a report with local law enforcement and the bank's fraud department. It felt surreal to sit in my small living room. Netflix paused on some dumb sitcom, while I explained to a detective over the phone that my own mother might be trying to fish her way into my inheritance. He suggested I also submit a complaint through the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3. It sounded intense, like something people did when strangers overseas stole their crypto, not when their mom lived an hour up the freeway. Still, I filled out the form, attached screenshots, emails, and the bank's notes about the failed login. Nina reviewed everything and told me I'd done the right thing. If this escalates, she said, you'll want a clear trail that shows you didn't just imagine this. The next step was protecting the one thing I'd never really thought about as part of my security. My actual front door. I ordered a Ring doorbell camera and a couple of small security cameras during my lunch break one day, the way some people impulse buy shoes. They arrived 2 days later in cheerful cardboard boxes. Installing them made me feel ridiculous and empowered at the same time. I walked around the condo with my phone, checking angles, making sure every door and the area near the building's mailboxes were in view. It felt dramatic, until I imagined my mom leaning over my mailbox or sitting in her car out front, connecting to my building's guest Wi-Fi and pretending the internet itself owed her a cut. For a little while nothing happened. The cameras sent me notifications when the mail carrier came or when my neighbor dragged his trash cans past my door, but that was it. I went back to my normal routine. Remote work, yoga videos on YouTube, late night scrolling on Reddit. One night, unable to sleep, I posted a long anonymized version of my situation on r/legal advice. I changed names and locations, but I told the truth about the inheritance, the pressure, the fake family meeting, the weird bank email. The comments flooded in. People told me to listen to my attorney, not to meet my mother alone, to keep everything in writing, to treat this like a crime, not a misunderstanding. A few even admitted they'd gone through similar things when a parent died and money was involved. Reading those stories made me feel less crazy and more focused. I wasn't overreacting. I was responding. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in a Zoom stand-up, my phone buzzed with a Ring alert. Someone was in front of my building. I glanced at the thumbnail and saw a car I recognized from years of school pickups. Trevor's SUV. My chest tightened. I turned my camera off on Zoom, pretending I was having connection issues, and opened the live feed. Trevor was parked at the curb, engine idling. He had his laptop open on his knees, the glow of the screen lighting up his face. A second later, another notification popped up. Motion detected near the mailboxes. The second camera showed my mom standing there, phone pressed to her ear, glancing around like she was checking if anyone was watching. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the tiny audio feed. I watched my mom talk into her phone, then looked toward Trevor's car. At almost the exact same time, my banking app sent a push notification. Unrecognized device attempting to access your account. It was like watching coordinates line up on a map. My mother at my mailbox. Trevor in his car outside my building with a laptop. My account pinging me that someone was trying to break in. I hit screen record on my phone and let it run. Later, I pulled the logs from my bank's website showing the time, IP address, and failed login attempt. The timestamps matched the Ring footage down to the minute. I sent everything to Nina. The videos, the logs, the IC3 report confirmation. She didn't text back this time. She called, and her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. This isn't just harassment anymore, she said. This is attempted identity theft. They're not just pushing you, they're breaking the law. The next day, with her help, I filed a formal police report and updated my complaint with the FBI's cyber unit. It felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. But I kept replaying the image of my mother at my mailbox and Trevor hiding in his car like a teenager trying to steal Wi-Fi. Whatever this was, it stopped being family drama. The moment they tried to put their hands on the money my father left me by pretending to be me. I'd spent months feeling like I was always one step behind their schemes. Now for the first time I had something they couldn't spin away with tears or guilt. Hard, ugly digital proof. And that was the moment this stopped being a private war and turned into a case a judge would have to look at. With my mother and her perfect new life under the harshest light possible. Alright, if you've made it this far, smash that like button because we're about to enter the courtroom. And trust me, what the judge said to my mother is something you do not want to miss. Subscribe now so you get notified when I drop the next part. And seriously, drop a comment. Have you ever caught someone trying to access your accounts? I want to hear your stories. I always thought courtrooms only looked dramatic on TV. All polished wood and heavy air. But the real one in downtown San Diego felt even heavier, like the walls themselves had seen too many people lie and break down and pretend they were sorry. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Nina, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the flat screen across from the judge's bench. That was where my life was about to play in high definition. My front door, my mailbox, my inheritance, and the people who decided they deserved it more than I did. On the other side of the room, my mom sat next to Trevor, her hair done, makeup perfect, outfit carefully chosen to scream responsible citizen instead of woman who tried to get into her daughter's accounts. Their lawyer was a different guy this time. Older, more polished, the kind of man who probably believed he could talk anyone into anything. Sophia and Brandon were in the second row behind them, dressed like this was a school assembly. They wouldn't be testifying, but they couldn't pretend they didn't know why their parents were here. When the judge walked in, everyone stood. I felt my knees wobble slightly, like they were remembering they used to belong to a kid, not someone about to listen to her own mother be described as a criminal. The prosecutor laid it out calmly. Attempts to access protected financial accounts, fraudulent emails, coordinated behavior captured on video and in digital logs. He didn't use dramatic language. He just stacked facts on top of facts until there was a tower I knew my mother could never climb down from. Nina had prepared me for everything. I'd seen the exhibits ahead of time, but something about watching the screen flicker on and seeing my front door from the perspective of that little camera made my stomach twist. The video showed the date, the timestamp, that dull gray afternoon. It showed my mom standing at the mailboxes with her phone pressed to her ear, glancing around like she was doing something as small as gossiping, not as big as trying to steal my name. Then the feed switched to the angle on the street. Trevor in his SUV, laptop open, the blue-white glow lighting up his face as his fingers moved on the keyboard. A split second later, the prosecutor pointed out how, right at that moment, my bank logs recorded a failed login attempt from an unfamiliar device. Then they displayed the screenshot of my banking app notification, the one that had made my heart hammer while I watched the live Ring feed. The timestamps lined up almost perfectly. It was like watching a crime documentary where the villain was played by your own family. Their lawyer tried to spin it. He said there'd been a misunderstanding, that my mother had simply been checking on paperwork, that Trevor had been helping with online access, that they thought they were logging into some old joint account from the marriage. He tried to paint me as paranoid, resentful, making a drama out of grief and confusion. I just sat there and listened because I knew what was coming next. Nina stood up, calm and precise. She reminded the court that the will had been fully probated, that my father's accounts had been in his sole name, then mine. No joint access, no gray area. She put up the emails, the fake bank link, the IC3 complaint, the messages where my mom had hinted at accounts and paperwork becoming complicated if I didn't cooperate. She played one of the voicemails where my mother's voice slipped just enough to show the threat under the sugar. By the time I took the stand, the story was already clear. My job wasn't to perform. It was just to tell the truth in the same steady way my dad would have told a bug report. I explained the family meeting, the settlement agreement they tried to push in that private room, the pressure, the threats, the sudden appearance of phishing emails after I refused. I explained how I'd changed passwords, frozen my credit, talked to my bank, been told there were failed logins. I described watching the Ring footage in real time and feeling every piece click together. The prosecutor asked me how it felt to realize my own mother was behind it. My throat tightened, but I answered honestly. I said it felt like watching someone reach into my chest and try to take the last piece of my dad I had left. When everything was finally submitted and both sides had said what they needed to say, the judge took a long time flipping through the paperwork. You could feel the room holding its breath. My mother stared straight ahead, face tight, eyes shiny in a way I no longer trusted. When the judge spoke, his voice was steady, almost bored, but the words hit like a hammer. He said the evidence showed clear attempts to gain unauthorized access to my accounts using deceptive methods. He talked about how using personal familiarity and prior knowledge to impersonate someone is not a family misunderstanding, it's fraud. He acknowledged that no large sums had been successfully taken, but that didn't erase the intent or the effort. He found my mother and Trevor guilty of charges related to attempted identity theft and fraud. He didn't sentence them to some dramatic TV show prison term. Instead, he did something that, in the real world, can hurt longer. He imposed a heavy fine, tens of thousands of dollars, plus restitution for my legal costs. He put them on probation, which meant every financial move they made for years would be watched. He ordered them to complete a program on financial crimes. And then he granted the restraining order Nina had requested, barring them from contacting me directly or indirectly for 5 years, barred from coming near my home or workplace, or messing with anything tied to my name. He also noted Trevor's real estate license and referred the case to the licensing board. I saw the exact moment Trevor understood what that meant. His shoulders sagged like someone had just taken a key piece off the board. No license. No luxury listings. No easy commissions to fund the lifestyle my mother had curated online. What really surprised me wasn't the legal part. It was the silence after. When we stepped out into the hallway, there were no dramatic screams or thrown punches. My mom didn't chase me down to beg. She just stood there, staring at a spot on the floor, her carefully arranged life crumbling in ways she couldn't fix with a filter or a caption. For years she'd posted about being blessed. Now she avoided everyone's eyes, like she finally understood that blessings aren't something you steal from your own child. I walked past her without stopping. Not to be cruel, but because there was nothing left to say that the judgment hadn't already said better. For the first time since my dad died, I felt like the ground under my feet belonged to me again. Not to my mother's version of family. Not to her hunger for fairness. But to the girl my dad had raised to understand that real value is something you protect, even when the person trying to take it shares your last name. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button right now. And if you want to hear what happened to my mom's perfect Instagram life after the verdict, subscribe because I'm going to tell you exactly how her world came crashing down. Drop a comment if you think the punishment fit the crime, or if you think she got off too easy. In the weeks after the verdict, my life didn't magically transform into some glossy after picture. But for the first time in a long time, the silence in my condo felt like peace instead of loneliness. I woke up without checking my phone in a panic, half expecting some new threat or guilt-soaked voicemail. The only notifications I saw were the usual Slack pings from work, emails from my manager about a new sprint, reminders from my budgeting app. My accounts were safe. My doorbell camera showed nothing more dramatic than Amazon packages and my neighbor walking his dog. It was strange how normal safety looked once you finally had it back. With the legal mess behind me, Nina helped me sit down and go through everything my dad had left, not as targets on a map but as tools for a real future. We shifted some of his carefully chosen tech stocks into broad index funds, set up an emergency fund, and created a plan for my retirement that would have made him proud. Instead of feeling guilty every time I opened my banking app, I started to feel capable, like I wasn't just holding on to what he gave me but actually growing it. I kept my job in tech, working remotely from the same condo we'd once shared. Some mornings I'd sit at the small dining table with my laptop, coffee from the drive-through Starbucks down the street, and look toward the empty chair where he used to sit with his own mug and a stack of printed code. It hurt, but in a clean way, like a scar that had finally healed over. Therapy helped with the rest. I found a counselor who specialized in grief and family trauma. Someone who didn't flinch when I said, "My mom tried to steal my inheritance," out loud. We talked about boundaries, about how family is supposed to protect you, not burn you for parts, about how I could carry my dad's memory without carrying every bad decision my mother made. Slowly, the knot in my chest loosened. I realized I'd spent years trying to earn a place in a version of family that had never really included me. Losing that fantasy hurt less than I thought it would. It was like waking up from a dream where you were always the extra chair at the table. I started showing up in different places instead. A local yoga studio where no one knew anything about my last name, just that I always grabbed a mat by the window. A community meetup for women in tech who traded stories about bad code and worse bosses, but also about supporting each other's careers and goals. Online, I drifted away from doom scrolling and toward communities that actually helped people. I messaged a moderator on r/personal finance and asked how I could give back without oversharing. Together we cleaned up my old anonymous post on r/legal advice and turned it into a cautionary tale. How to document financial abuse, how to protect your accounts, how to recognize when family conversations about money have crossed the line into manipulation. With part of the restitution and a portion of my inheritance, I made a donation to an organization that supports victims of identity theft. It felt right that some of the money my mom tried to steal ended up helping people whose lives had been ripped apart by the same kind of crime. I didn't blast it on social media. I just kept the confirmation email in a folder labeled, "Dad would like this." As for my mom, the consequences the judge handed down did exactly what they were supposed to. The fines and legal fees forced her to sell the big house she used to brag about online. Trevor's license issues meant fewer deals, less income, fewer posts about closing another dream home. Their Instagram feed slowed, then shifted from champagne and sunsets to vague quotes about starting over and learning who really has your back. None of those posts had my name on them. The restraining order kept them out of my inbox and away from my front door. Sophia and Brandon didn't reach out, and I didn't go looking for them. Maybe one day when they're older and sift through the pieces on their own, they'll see what really happened. Maybe they'll hate me for it. Or maybe they'll quietly understand. Either way, that choice belongs to them, not to me. People sometimes say, but she's still your mother. Like biology is some kind of moral shield. What I learned is that shared DNA doesn't give anyone the right to your future. Love is proven in how people protect you when it's inconvenient, not in how loudly they say family when money is on the table. My dad's real inheritance wasn't the condo or the accounts. It was the spreadsheet he taught me how to read. The credit score he told me to guard. The idea that integrity matters even when no one is watching. It was the courage to walk into a room full of people who wanted to take everything, and say no. If you've never been through a family fight over money, I hope you never do. But if you're sitting there right now with a knot in your stomach watching someone you love try to twist your loyalty into leverage, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not selfish for protecting what's yours. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not a bad daughter or son for refusing to be scammed by someone who happens to share your last name. In a world where so much of our life is tied to passwords, accounts, and paper trails, the most important thing you own is your ability to say, no. This stops here. My mom lured me into a family meeting, and she walked away thinking she could threaten me into handing over my inheritance. What she didn't count on was that my dad had already given me something worth more than every dollar she chased. The knowledge that Real family protects your future. They don't try to steal it. If this story helped you, please like this video and subscribe so more people can see it. Drop a comment below sharing your own experience with family and money, because the more we talk about this, the less power these scams have. And if you know someone dealing with inheritance pressure or financial abuse, share this with them. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Protect your future. And remember, you don't owe anyone your life just because they share your last name.